The topic for today is maximizing workplace productivity and total user experience in an effort to optimize return to work policies. So the general question is, how do we design workspaces, whether it's from the architectural side or the IoT/sensor side, the furniture side, or anything with respect to sound, color, light? How do we do that causes people to say, wow, I really want to be back here. I really love being here. And so part of our group is really the ecosystem. And we have on the development side for real estate, we have Brett Lipman, who's the CEO at Preylock Holdings, which you'll come to learn has developed some of the most sophisticated and desirable properties for household names that we've become familiar with, such as Google, Amazon, NVIDIA, and so forth. And then we have, representing himself and also on behalf of Applied Materials, we have Emmanuel Daniel, who you'll learn is a subject matter expert on all things for digitizing commercial real estate, no matter the asset class, but especially now these days with data centers. And then we have the CEO at Loftwall, Bryce, who is going to help us understand what he's doing today with his furniture and separation. I'm kind of struggling with the right way to say this. He's not going to struggle at all, but you're going to be fascinated by what they're doing and how they're trying to enable workplace to be more productive. And then we have Nic at Occuspace, who's the founder and CEO at Occuspace, who's going to help us understand how his occupancy sensors are measuring the activities inside a office or a factory or a school or wherever, and to help people make better decisions on how they design places to be more productive and how they even make decisions on whether to build or not to build a property. So let me stop there and just welcome everybody to the call. I appreciate you making the time in your day. And let's start with Nic. Nic, could you please introduce yourself?
Yeah, Nic Halverson, CEO, founder of Occuspace. I started the company when I was a junior electrical engineering student at UC San Diego. I hated how crowded my gym, dining hall, library was on campus, and I created a sensor to count how many people are in the space in real time, report that on an app for students. And then the guy who ran real estate at UCSD called me up and said, Nic, I'm spending $1 billion a year on construction, and I have no data on how my buildings are being used. And that's when Occuspace was born about 6 years ago. Excited to talk to everybody today about how we use buildings and how we can improve the experience in them.
Well, we're so glad to have you. And let's flip next to Bryce at Loftwall. Would you please introduce yourself?
Yeah, appreciate it, Ari. So Loftwall, we make office furniture, and I get asked this all the time. So you make tables, desks, and chairs? And I say, no, we make this stuff when your office is too loud, when your people can't get their job done, when they can't focus, when you're trying to cram more people into a smaller footprint, or you've got a return to work strategy that doesn't totally accommodate the new influx of workforce that you've got. And so that could look like dividers, walls, screens. That could look like acoustic baffles. It could look like sound masking, acoustic wall coverings like I've got behind me. And so the company's definitely evolved in the post-COVID era of responding from landlord needs. I need to fit X people into Y square footage to user experience. And how do I retain the people that I have? How do I use furniture as an asset for employee retention? So excited to be on the call today.
Amazing. Let's go next to Emmanuel. Emmanuel, please introduce yourself.
Thank you, Ari, and good morning, good afternoon, everybody. Emmanuel Daniel. I've been involved with smart buildings and smart cities for over 2 decades now. My predominant focus is on how do you drive and create human experiences in physical spaces, thereby optimizing human productivity and also maximizing the effectiveness of the human engagement in that space. I worked across different types of real estate assets, commercial, enterprise, mixed realty developments, and just before a few years ago, I started getting into data centers. How are we able to digitally design, build, and create data centers, and how are we able to accelerate the delivery of these data centers and this conversation.
Excellent, thank you. I've been looking for Brett. Brett, are you on the call? I didn't see him. I think he's delayed. He's part of the crew. It's very important to hear his voice. So hopefully he'll be joining us shortly. So let me just delay for 1 second. And before we get into the Q&A, because there is a lot of discussion here, let me just say that roughly a month from now, on Friday, December 13th, this time at 10 a.m. Central, we're going to have an extended version of this webinar series, this panel discussion series. And the focus is going to be on cyber physical security. In particular, we're going to look at how we monitor and harden government facilities to decrease the vulnerability for OT systems and the potential impact to building systems, personnel, and the environment. And we'll be very privileged to hear the head of cyber at the Pentagon. And so Daryl will speak to that, and we'll have the similar practice leader head at Intelligent Buildings, Scott, who also has the contract with the U.S. General Services Administration over roughly 8,500 buildings. You probably know the iconic ones, such as the White House. And then we have the head of workplace at McKesson, and also the new chairperson of IFMA, which is the International Facilities Management Association, and this is Lynn. So we'll be joined there as well with the CEO of KMC and the head of Connected Systems at KMC. I just want to say that. And Brett, have you been able to join through my delay tactic? Okay, so something's up, and we'll just move on. So let's go to. I was going to ask Brett from the perspective of a developer of some of the most advanced commercial properties, what features and what capabilities are important from his perspective as someone who decides what to build, for example, for NVIDIA, or what to build, for example, for Google and so forth, in terms of lab space, in terms of other workplace, what sensors to include, what furniture that his team recommends, and all these things to cause the highest productivity. So I'd like to direct that question really to Emmanuel. Emmanuel, you've seen so much with your tenure at Microsoft and in working with so many clients of Microsoft. From your perspective, what's important? What capabilities and features are important in workplace, in building and campus, that would cause productivity to be as high as possible?
So that's a great question, Ari, and thank you for that. The biggest impact owners, operators of real estate, and providers of space look to achieve is to drive human engagement in the spaces that they're at. To drive human engagement, you have a variety of items, variety of elements that you have to consider that are going to directly affect productivity. In fact, the effect on productivity also has to do with the type of collaboration that person would like to do at that very point in time. You have certain settings that are conducive for group meetings. You have certain settings that are conducive for quiet, heads down kind of work. And you also have collaboration settings where you have to get into a learning atmosphere. Now, to be able to do this, humans are able to best perform under ideal conditions of sound, under ideal conditions of light, under ideal conditions of heating, cooling, atmospheric conditions, and in certain cases also looking at environmental triggers where you have biophilia elements in and around the settings that they're operating at. So it is a combination of all these elements that is going to bring that in. Now the question is, don't buildings already have it? And the answer is yes. To some extent, your building automation systems or your building management systems do have it, but they are never enough for us to be able to understand and cater to human behavior at that point in time. So when we're talking about data, one, how crowded is that space? If that space is going to be extremely crowded, it's going to neutralize the amount of collaboration, and it will in fact deter people from coming into that space. And that's the last thing we want as owner operators
Right.
of that space.
Right.
The second thing is going to be light. Sometimes we fail to understand the importance of light. Today, a lot of the architectural designs cater for natural light to come into these spaces, but you have a balance. You're going to have a balance of natural light combined with wavelength of light that is going to be established within your office environments. The second is going to be noise, and I think, Bryce, your introduction on the importance of noise dampening and noise control within workspaces are even more important today, because if you look at many of the office plans, offices are shifting to open plans or offices are shifting to neighborhoods. Now, in these settings, I would like to be in a group. I would like to sit with my friends and colleagues. But how is the walls, the furniture, and the spaces around me going to dampen the noise? Because I may have a colleague who talks extremely loud, or may have someone who I can't even hear at all when they speak, right? And that's where the acoustics of the space that you're operating in also become critical. And in addition to that, I would say one other thing is the ability to find what you need to find. Wayfinding, indoor navigation within these spaces so that I'm able to move around and get to the right location that I have to get to are important. All these elements are in combination are needed for maximizing productivity of the humans within that space.
Perfect timing. Thank you, Emmanuel. I want to give an early warning to Nic and Bryce. I'm about to riff off of what Emmanuel just said, but we're honored to have Brett at Preylock just join, and I wanted to open the mic to him, and first of all, let him do an introduction, and then I want to address the very same question to him from his perspective, because I think it's unique and important. So, Brett, welcome.
Thank you, Ari, and apologies for the delay. I'm actually on the road right now. I'm in Mexico for work. Ari didn't give me a choice as to the time of this meeting or the place of this meeting, so I accommodated nonetheless. Just to give you guys a background, I'm the CEO, founding partner of Preylock. Preylock is a real estate operator, owner, developer of R&D, office, and industrial warehouses throughout the country. Our focus has been exclusively on major tech tenants up until now. The blue chip tenants, our tenants range from Netflix, Google, Amazon, Taiwan Semiconductor, Applied Materials is one of our newest tenants. NVIDIA, we just sold a campus that we had leased to NVIDIA. So we've built out a very strong business that caters to technology-oriented blue chip tenants. At this point, we have about $4 billion of assets under management across the United States. On the R&D office side, which is more relevant to this conversation, we're focused on Silicon Valley, Greater Seattle, but mostly the east side, so the Redmond, Bellevue, Kirkland corridors, and then Austin, Texas, really the top 3 tech markets in the country. On the industrial side, we're everywhere, but we cater almost exclusively to the e-commerce side of the business for companies like Amazon, Target, Walmart, so on and so forth. I think that gives a pretty good explanation
Perfect.
of who we are, where we come from.
It's also humble. I think that that's your approach. I think that's why you're so well received by the leaders of all these organizations. So thank you for joining. So Brett, let me build on the first question. I'd like to see if you can address. And Emmanuel gave us his perspective, which was, in one word, it was delicious. So thank you again, Emmanuel. But from your perspective, as a developer of some of the most advanced commercial properties for your tenants that you mentioned, what are, in your opinion, the must-have capabilities and features from their perspective as your tenants and your perspective as a builder and developer on where you want to spend money to cause people to have the highest amount of productivity and frankly, attractiveness, where they actually want to come back to the office. They want to be there. They like to be there. So Brett, it's an open question. What are the must-have capabilities and features that you and your team think about?
So I think what we have heard from our tenants, what we see in terms of some of the buildings where they're more multi-tenant buildings, is amenities. Amenities are extraordinarily important to tenants and to getting the employees back in the office. Very small things, such as providing food, meals for the tenants, for the employees, is huge. So having a kitchen or a full-scale kitchen where you can produce food for your tenants has become very important, because although they say there's no such thing as a free lunch, these employees now expect a free lunch. And we've noticed that it gets the employees in their desk. You'd be surprised. These are engineers that make $300,000 minimum up to $2, $3, $4, $5 million a year. And the lunch is so important to them. We saw with NVIDIA, they built out a very high-end cafeteria and almost restaurant within their building, their new headquarters, and it got people to start coming back to the office. T-Mobile is one of our tenants. We own their global HQ, and they have a full-scale food court in their HQ that we help them build. And what do I mean by that? They have probably 20 different vendors, 20 different restaurants that employees can go and decide, today I want Chinese, tomorrow I want Italian, next day I want Indian food, and they have that all within reach within the campus, and it keeps them in the campus, and then they stay there till later at night because they end up eating dinner there as well. And there's a bar there. We had to get them a liquor license so that they could serve alcohol to the employees.
Amazing.
So I know it sounds like it sounds like something that is trivial, if you will, but at the end of the day, these tenants really care about their food. I mean, if you think about us as human beings, we're always thinking about that next meal. What am I having for lunch? What am I having for dinner? And it's on the employee's mind, and they're thinking about it from a psychological perspective. Having that food offering on campus makes their life that much easier. It really does.
Brett, this reminds me of a story I heard from Nic. Nic, could you describe a little bit of your experience with the Google team, with your occupancy sensors on kind of overlapping a little bit what Emmanuel said, but more specifically what Brett just stated about food?
Yeah, this is a case study that we've done recently with Google, Waymo, Sodexo. That's really interesting. 95% of our customers use Occuspace to measure how is all of our office being used, where do people go, where do they not go, how long do they spend in certain areas, and start to get towards that experience side of things that Emmanuel was talking about, where if you've got 40 buildings and millions of square feet, it's hard to know what are the spaces people are productive in or use or don't. Our data can do that. And then the Sodexo and Google Waymo team, they did a really interesting case study where they said, hey, we think we can reduce food waste in the cafeteria by understanding how many people are in the building. These days, it's such a big variance of how many people come in every day that we monitored the whole Waymo building. It started out with one, now it's in many. And every day at 10:30 a.m., we push a notification to the Sodexo cafeteria staff, and we say, hey, based on foot traffic in the building, this is how many people we think are going to come to lunch today. They make food for that many people, and they reduce their food waste by, I believe, about 60%, getting a 2-to-1 ROI on Occuspace, measuring the entire building on food waste reduction alone, let alone all the productivity, space planning use cases that most people use our data for. So that was a really fun case study.
Fascinating. And by the way, I want to, before I move on to Bryce, because I have an interesting question for you. Anyone who's part of this call, please, if you have a question, put it into the chat, and either Rick or myself or someone will look for it, and at the very end we'll try to go through. And also to all the panelists, please riff off each other if you have something that Brett says you agree with or don't agree with, or you have another experience, or similarly to Emmanuel. Please, this is an open conversation, so I'm just trying to facilitate. But Bryce, just shifting gears a little bit, what is an acoustic calculator, and why is that important for this conversation?
Yeah. Well, Emmanuel touched on it a little bit. So the trend in offices is less walls, obviously more neighborhoods, people who were used to working at home coming back to the office. Brett touched on it with, okay, how do we get them into the office? And one of the things that we're focused on, how do we keep them in the office once you get them there? Because a hot lunch is great, but if 48% of their work is focus related, heads down related in the office, then we got to give them the tools to do that. And if you can see from end to end on the floor, and there's all those visual distractions, and our offices sound closer to an interstate highway than it does the hum of a refrigerator, then acoustics start to matter a lot. And so we built a tool, and we're not the first to do it, where you can put in the dimensions of your space, some features, what are the floors made out of, what are the ceilings made out of, what are the walls made out of, how many people are in the space, what's the purpose of the space, and it'll tell you, hey, this is what your reverberation time should be. The sound the time for when sound leaves your mouth bounces off a surface and echoes back to you. And the longer that time period is, the more you hear that echo, reverb, that thing we all think of when we go into an empty gymnasium or a cave or something like that. And depending on the use of the space, that number, that amount of time, that reverb time changes, and the expectation changes. So we're working with companies to say, how do we go in after the fact? This a lot of times isn't thought of until day 2 after people have moved in. And how do we have, offerings for people made here in the US, sustainable green offerings that help you tune down the level of noise in your space so that people can get the work done that they actually showed up to do.
It's amazing. And this is, I assume, anonymous. You don't zero in, Bryce, on a particular person.
Correct. Yeah. So you can do it for your specific workspace, for your office. It's no sign-in required. There's no fee required. This is just to educate our customers, because an educated customer makes a better decision.
All right. So this is an open question to anybody. Whether it's products from Loftwall or from Occuspace or usage by Applied Materials or any other tenant or a building developer, how vulnerable do you think all this tech might be to being disrupted from, say, someone hacking the building? Maybe they want to turn off the HVAC in the middle of summer. Any thoughts on that? And I guess any thoughts on that in general? But B, can that be predicted? Emmanuel, you're probably the closest person who has a thought on that.
Yeah, I'll take a stab at it. The one thing people don't understand is, or they don't appreciate, is the amount of data that you need to collect to make people in spaces productive. So for example, when I used to work at Microsoft and was leading the digital transformation of the East Campus, across the East Campus that we were building and designing, we had around 120,000 sensors that were deployed. Now, if you have 120,000 sensors to drive productivity, in addition to the whole point about food, we're all extremely passionate about food. But food is only as good if I can encourage people to go to the cafeteria, to sit down, to find a table, and to eat it. The same thing about engagement. And in fact, we took it one step further, where we said, hey, is there a way to bring your family and friends to this environment so they can see and love the work environment? And ultimately, the goal being that you'll fall in love with the work environment so much that you would want to come and work for that organization, right? That's why spaces, collaboration become extremely important. Now, when it came to us modeling that behavior or encouraging that behavior, you have all these sensors that are out there. Now, the risk is, if someone has to hack into those sensors, and let's say they create junk data, your sensors become useless. More than junk data, if they have to hack into those sensors and they have to send wrong signals to critical equipment in that building, such as your HVAC equipment or your water management systems or your energy management systems, there are serious risks of the system shutting down or systems overworking and probably blowing up or getting out of commission. In addition to that, the other challenge is every human has unique behaviors. So if they are able to hack into these networks, I actually can find out which human being is going to be there in the cafeteria picking up coffee at what point in time, just by looking at their patterns and their schedules. So Ari, if you decide to come into a building and all of a sudden we know what your patterns are, we can easily predict at this point in time, Ari is going to be in this room at this location because this is what he's been doing for the past, X number of years or X number of months. That is
By the way, my marker is green tea.
Right. So probably easier to pick you out. But these are serious threats. And once again, you can anonymize data, you can do all the elements in, but the whole aspect of securing the device, securing the data, and managing the network on which these devices run is new for buildings. And that's why we took extra care to say, how can you drive device level security? How can you drive data level security? How can you take care of device updates and device management? Now, Brett will probably know that when he designs his building, how important physical security is. Okay, and from Nic's perspective, with all the sensors that they deploy, they probably pay extra attention to securing the hardware devices. Now, if you have to step back and look at it from an owner's perspective that buys these devices, if I have to allow all the vendors and suppliers of these devices to come into my network and to run and patch and update my devices, okay, that is a security vulnerability right there. So we now have to deal with enforce physical security type restrictions on vendors in the digital world, so we don't compromise access to our networks and we don't compromise access to our data, because something as simple as an update can take down your entire OT network of these devices. So OT level device security, OT level device management is becoming absolutely critical. And in today's day and age, it is probably the most important thing to a building, in addition to the physical security that the owners have to take care of.
Let me ask this to Brett. I'm curious, Brett, if you're interested in responding. When you consider what Emmanuel just said, going forward, I mean, let's say that these kinds of sensors are critical for the tenants, and they want these sensors in their buildings to do all these different things. And we haven't even spoken about, consumption of gas, electric, water, because those are things to monitor too, that could, for sure on certain types of leases that, the tenants are responsible for these expenses. But from your perspective as kind of looking forward into 2025, 2026, simple question. When you think about your technology clients, what are the trends you see versus, I don't know if you're looking at some government clients, I guess, what are the trends that you see?
The trends in terms of security?
The trends in terms of, these are like maybe two things. The security, in terms of protecting all these things, and you can think of security as both physical and digital security, but then also more important is, what are the layers of things, whether they're sensors, whether it's workplace design, whether it's certain types of furniture that they're showing reference to, whether it's in office spaces, cafeterias, lab spaces. What are the trends that you're seeing that are important going forward?
So I think that there is a trend again towards re-densifying the office. COVID is now over, and during COVID, there was this, as groups were thinking about bringing their employees back to the office, they wanted to make the office space less dense. We're noticing the opposite now, which is very interesting, that the space is becoming more dense, and that they're looking to enhance the experience for the employee by making things more dense. Why? Because there's no point in having employees in the office if they're going to be holed up in their little office cubicles away from everyone else, because then they're not collaborating. So if you're thinking about a 3-day in the office work week, or even 4-day, when you have your people in the office, you want them to be as dense as possible. You want them to be communicating and collaborating as much as possible. So we're actually working through this with one of our tenants as we speak, and they're asking us to help them come up with a better space plan to re-densify the office. So that was an interesting trend, what we saw. In addition, I think there's a huge trend just towards environmental, making things more environmentally friendly generally. So with regards to Amazon, I can say this, I mean, across their warehouse portfolio, they want electric chargers for all of the warehouse employees. These are not office employees. These are warehouse, low income earning warehouse employees, and they still want charging stations for them.
Amazing.
What else? I'm seeing a desire for power, right? Power has become one of the most important words in real estate today. It's not just the data center word. Everyone thinks about it in the context of data centers. But if you're thinking about an Applied Materials or an NVIDIA or an AMD, really the companies that are pushing the growth in our country today, a big part of what they do requires higher power than a typical office tenant. Why? Because they're testing hard drives. They're testing equipment and chips that they're creating maybe in their manufacturing facilities, but you have the engineers that want to play around with them in the office space or in the R&D space, which I think are merging. The idea of an R&D office being two separate elements of a company are no longer. I think most of these companies will have office buildings with multiple labs in them, so they can test these products, and that's why power has become so important. Preylock is very focused on power in terms of how we look at our buys going forward and our developments going forward, because we understand how important it is to our tenants. And then
It's fascinating.
I think lastly, security is obviously a huge issue today, given that everything is in the cloud and information is so readily hackable, if you will. We see companies get hacked. We get our lifeline alerts, LifeLock alerts all the time, and they're telling us that our information was just stolen from AT&T, from American Airlines, from whoever it may be. A big thing today is just how are you securing the information of your end user and customer, but also how are you securing the information of the employee and the work that's being done on the employee systems.
Perfect. Thank you. Anybody want to comment on that?
Yeah.
And if not, yeah, please.
I got a couple thoughts, and actually ties into a couple of the comments that we've got. So EJ's got a comment about sharing data and the integration and smart buildings, the back and forth of employee data that's being shared too. So we're sharing data wirelessly in ways that we haven't before, in larger volumes than we ever have before. And then also what Brett was talking about with this densification of the office, this it's like a rubber band effect, right? We needed to have less and less space aggregated for employees over the 90s and 2000s. They're shrinking into a smaller footprint. And then COVID expands, right? Everyone needs all this personal space. And now that rubber band is kind of snapping back in the other direction. There's a psychology science called proxemics, and it's all about the science of how close you need to be or how far you need to be from somebody to do certain types of work. And so it's not just the security and the privacy of cyber attacks, but it's also like mental and emotional privacy and security of people doing highly complex work, especially in the buildings that Preylock traffics in, right? Is these people are doing incredibly high caliber work, and where they sit relative to the people around them, the orientation of their chair, their monitors, all of those things matter. And so flexibility and adaptability become incredibly important. Things that used to be fixed assets, now almost everything has to be mobile in some way, shape, or form. And so I think it's fascinating how it goes from the digital to the tactile, and a lot of the problems and solutions exist in the same sphere. So, and I thought it tied really nicely into EJ's comment, and Daryl had a comment too about, hey, we're moving this densification, right? Like that's going to cause a noise problem. Yeah, that's why we exist. Why my company's growing right now.
There's a balance.
People everyone's raising their hand and saying, yeah, I got a problem with that. And so you have to continue to have creative ways to solve it. There's no one size fits all. I can't come in and spray foam a building.
Bryce, I want to come back to you.
Sound quiet now.
Bryce, I want to come back to you on, because I know you have some ideas on making these more densified spaces also more private. I know you have some brilliant ideas, but I also want to know, Nic, what are your thoughts? I mean, you're the one who's, I guess, most of your activities involve with universities, right? But you've increasingly got involved with corporate workplace. So what are you seeing with all your data?
I agree with a lot of what you guys are saying. People are trying to densify their spaces. At 12, 18 months ago, our customers wanted to reduce their square feet per employee, mainly to reduce their overall footprint and save real estate money. Today, what everybody's talking about is we're hitting most organizations we measure, of which is 80% higher ed, 20% corporate. They're saying we're at 25% average utilization during the workday and maybe 40 to 45% peak during the workday utilization. We actually want to reduce the square feet per employee by going to shared desks, not necessarily just to reduce our real estate costs, but to actually improve the employee experience. Nobody likes the ghost town feeling, going into an office and it's 20, 30% full. And, and then you sit on Zoom calls all day. That's the worst experience you can have. But how can we have shared desks, increase the utilization, so when you go into the office, it actually feels like it's 50, 60, 70% utilized, and it's vibrant and there's people there. And time again, our customers are telling us, more than coffee machines and new furniture and everything, the number one thing we can do to improve the experience in the office is just make it so that it feels like it's actually full and that you actually run into people when you come into work.
So, Emmanuel, what is Microsoft or another client you might be aware of done to increase the density, achieve some of the goals that are now being highlighted here, but also riffing off of what Daryl points out in his comments and what EJ points out, how do you do all that but not be vulnerable to hearing things you shouldn't be hearing, or even being distracted by too much noise? And then I want to go, Bryce, to kind of tie that up in a bow. So, Emmanuel, what are you saying?
So the quest towards densification occurred because of two big things. One, we wanted to put more space in between us because of health and safety requirements. So we feel comfortable to come back to the work environment. But what usually happens is the more space you put in between people, the less collaboration and the less communication takes place. Now, because during the pandemic period, people thought, hey, people don't have to come into work. Everybody's going to work from home. A lot of the organizations started giving up their real estate space, right? And that's where the whole downsizing occurred. Hence, the rise to fame of occupancy sensors, though not originally designed for letting go of space. The whole goal of occupancy sensors was to understand space usage and space effectiveness. All of a sudden went to saying that, hey, let me understand what spaces I don't need so I can start getting rid of it, right? We designed it for something else. And probably, Nic, you've noticed that we didn't design it to minimize space. We designed it to make space more productive. Then all of a sudden we'll say, oh, you know what? Nobody's using it. Let me get rid of that space. Hence people didn't renew their leases. They let their leases lapse. Now what is happening is when people are starting to come back to work because of the dip in productivity that has occurred, and that dip because of lack of communication and collaboration, bringing people in 3 days a week or 5 days a week, or even hybrid, come when you want to or come when you need to. The Quest is now saying that, hey, look, there is plenty of space available and it's not a ghost town. So if you go to the office, you can actually see your friends, you can see your colleagues, and you can get into a discussion and you can get into
have a great meal.
Yeah, and have a great meal. So food is a very important point there. Great food is something that's always been an attractive lure for folks to come back. So with these elements coming in, the people need to see people. As we always say, iron sharpens iron, man sharpens man. That's just how it is. Nothing happens in solitude. Though at certain points in time, you need solitude because you got to hone it in. But other times, we like to have social life surrounding us. So these two external factors have added to, one, space being lesser available, two, people being comfortable to working in their homes, which is probably the best space that they have because your home is your home. So motivating them to come back and to engage in a way where we have to convince them now, hey, if you come to the office, you're going to have higher levels of productivity. Now, what happens is now you'll actually notice a lot of organizations are having challenges managing spaces 3 days a week. because the day when everybody decides to come to the office, either a Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, or Monday, Wednesday, for whatever combination they choose, all of a sudden you have parking lots are full. You have office spaces are full, and that is now creating a deterrent situation. People are saying, you know what, the office is too crowded. I don't want to go because, I didn't get my Monday seat or I didn't get my Tuesday seat. And that is counterproductive to what you like to create. Now, in that situation, if you have spaces designed for 100 people and 90 people show up, you're going to have noise. You're going to have people bumping into each other. So now all of a sudden, the importance of space management, not adding more barricades, not adding more walls, but managing that space and subsectioning that space, where now we're saying that, hey, you want to work, great, you have day desks, you come there, you drop in, you sit there. Now guess what, you want to have an ad hoc brainstorming session, guess what, we have a collaboration space designed for you with nice sofas and and comfortable chairs. Go there and have a collaboration. So what we are now trying to promote is, don't anchor yourself to a space type. Anchor yourself to the need of the hour in terms of what you would like to achieve, and start utilizing all the spaces within that facility. And you notice, Ari, in the good old days, you used to have floors of single type spaces, just cubicles. Today, you have floors of mixed space types. You've got work areas, you've got collaboration areas, you've got coffee areas, you've got pantry areas. And all this is coming in where we're saying that people need different spaces at different points in time. Design them, get them to move around, get them to use it. And that's how they're trying to manage it.
So let me do this. So in this time we have left, Bryce, can you tie this up in a bow? Like, how do we do this better? How do we make the spaces more dense and maintain the security that is necessary, but also amp up the privacy, amp up kind of the localized, I don't know, maybe think of it as a micro environment that kind of places the envelope around a person.
I think it starts with the voices you've got at the table, Ari, right? Like if my constituency is architects, designers, space planners, and Brett's constituencies are multi-billion-dollar companies with thousands of distributed employees, and we've got experts like Emmanuel and Nic who can help us understand and lean into the tech. We have to integrate it all, right? And so that's what we're working actively on, is how do I take my non-smart traditional office furniture technology, and how do I use the best tech out there flexibly to give building owners, facility managers, space designers the tools to make the right decisions, right? So each office, each environment, each culture is different. How loud do you want it to be? How dense do you want it to be? What days do you want to be populated or not? But people deserve to know when they show up to work how crowded it's going to be.
But Bryce, let me drill down. Let's say you're working next to Emmanuel. Emmanuel has a booming, articulate voice, and he's always talking to the movers and shakers of the world, but you're right next to him.
Yeah.
And you're always talking to your respective mover. How do you guys get your stuff done? Like what tech could you bring to the table?
The answer is not noise canceling headphones. I think that's like the strategy that companies hoped for years, is let's just buy everybody AirPods Pros. It'll be fine. And that doesn't work, right? And to Emmanuel's point, it just drives collaboration off a cliff, right? I put these on and everybody, all they think is that guy doesn't want me to talk to him. That guy doesn't want to help me solve my problem. And so what we have to do is have flexible spaces. And I saw a comment from Daryl in the chat as well about, what about these rooms, the space within a space? There's been a big rise in furniture of like that standalone phone booth thing. But how do I have pods for 2, 4, 6, 10 people to go into that don't require traditional construction? And can I use Nic sensors to know when they're used, what's their utilization or not? Can I have the air quality? Can I have the temperature? When I walk in with my employee badge, does it know my ideal temperature when I sit down in the space to get my best work done? Can it pop up on my phone and say, what type of work are you here to do? How many people are you expecting? All of those things can be achieved. We have the technology, but all the constituents, all the players have to talk. We have to work together, from design to execution and everything in between. And that's why I loved being invited to the panel. It's like, oh, this is the table we want to be at Loftwall.
Good. Well, thank you. I think you tied it up in a bow. We're at the hour. I want to thank everybody for making time available. I know you're all incredibly busy. I've been informed that recording should be available as soon as next Wednesday after post-production. And so anyone who registers should receive a recording. You can use that as an asset for your respective companies and to make people more productive in their workplace. Thank you all.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks.